Felicitous greetings, fellow Fanatics. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Adam the Fanatic, also known as Mario Fag 15, and today we're going to be taking a look at Legends Untold by Inspiring Games. Please keep in mind that there are two separate novice sets, both of which serve as equally suitable starting points for the game. I'll be taking a look specifically at the Great Sewers, but most of what's here is also applicable to the Weeping Caves set. Legends Untold is a tabletop game meant to feel like an RPG without the need for a GM. Taking place in a low magic fantasy setting known as Mornadar, up to 4 players will each take a character, choose starting weapons, and 3 talents. You'll then set up the game according to the scenario you choose, which will direct you to use certain types of cards to create the adventure deck. For first-time players, the game also includes a video game-style tutorial which will guide you through the rules step by step as you play out a predetermined game. Before beginning the game, you'll need to build a hero. In true RPG fashion, they'll grow stronger over the course of multiple games, but at the onset, each hero begins with a crude weapon and 3 talents. There are 2 types of talents: skill and weapon talents. Skills are primarily used outside of combat, while weapon talents are used solely for fighting. These will define special actions your character can take, having you exhaust a card by turning it sideways to use most abilities, or flipping them over for more strenuous tasks. Talent cards also represent your HP. When a card is flipped, it represents that you've taken damage. If a character would be wounded when all their talent cards are already flipped, that character is knocked unconscious. If the entire party falls unconscious, the heroes have failed their quest and the adventure ends. If players manage to complete their adventure, they'll level up and be able to either upgrade their equipment by taking a new item or weapon, or upgrading an existing one. Or, sometimes they'll take a new talent instead, depending on which level they advance to. After deciding their characters, players will need to choose a scenario to play. Each novice set comes with 8 scenario cards designed for parties from levels 1 through 8. On each card, you'll have a standalone scenario on one side, and on the reverse you'll have an episode meant to be used with that set's campaign book to tell a guided story, for a total of 16 different adventures. Each scenario will instruct you to use a certain number of cards for the event deck and the location deck, generally chosen at random, though there may be some special instructions for specific cards to add or remove depending on the scenario. Similarly, you'll also build the adventure deck by combining a certain number of foe, discovery, loot, and trap cards, which will be shuffled together. You use the top set of numbers for the default difficulty, though players wanting a tougher challenge can use the lower set of numbers. You'll play the game by traveling through various location cards, each of which has 2 or more exits. Each exit has its own level of light, which affects how scouting works in the next room. Darker exits mean you're more likely to stumble into traps, but brighter exits mean that enemies are more likely to notice and ambush you, so it becomes a matter of judging which threat your party is currently better equipped to handle. As soon as you reveal a new room, your party makes a scouting check to show how alert they are. Alertness helps you better detect and avoid traps. Many rooms are blocked off by an obstacle when they first appear, which you'll need to overcome before you can proceed into the room. After overcoming the obstacle, if any, you'll proceed into the room itself, where you'll have to draw 1 or more cards from the adventure deck. Here in the Fuller Pits, you can see that it specifies a discovery card, so you'll draw cards from the top of the adventure deck until you find one and then resolve it. If you find any loot in the process, you'll gain it after successfully resolving the discovery or defeating the foe in question. We also see 2 additional symbols that show that there are insects in this location and that there's gas in the area. These icons do nothing on their own, but certain abilities can make use of them. They make certain cards worse than they otherwise would be. After resolving the icons in the corner, you'll then be able to explore the rest of the room. Here in the Fuller Pits, there's a part of the card that's blocked by a barrier. So in this case, you draw a barrier card, and the party can attempt to pass it if they want to explore inside. Behind the barrier, you can see that there's an adventure deck symbol. It doesn't specify a type of card, so you'd simply draw a card from the deck and resolve it regardless of type. Inside said location is a campsite. These areas are better suited to resting and will allow the party to more quickly recover their strength. Over here is a search zone. Players can look here in hopes of finding loot from the adventure deck, but if they're careless, they also risk falling victim to traps. As you adventure through the game, you'll encounter various cards that represent what you find. Loot cards are the simplest, and if you find them alone, you'll simply be able to take them. If, however, there's an enemy with the item, you'll have to first defeat them before you can take your prize. Foe cards are just what they sound like, enemies that you'll have to either fight off or avoid in order to survive. When you first encounter a foe, you'll check to see whether the players or their enemies are ambushed by rolling 3 dice against the number in the top left corner. If the players fail to meet the value, they're ambushed by the enemy. However, if they exceed it by 3 or more, they get the drop on their foes and surprise them instead. In any other circumstance, both sides notice each other before battle and neither gets an advantage in the first round. At the bottom of the card, you'll see that you fight a certain number of enemies depending on the number of heroes. The first number represents how many enemies start the fight, and the second number represents their retreat value. If the number of enemies remaining equals or drops below that point, the rest of them will flee at the end of the round. Each of these individual foes has a number of health represented beside that. Most of the time this is a fixed number, though especially powerful foes may also have their HP scaled to the heroes. Every enemy has a melee value, showing how much damage they do up close, and also shows any modifiers for attacking them at range or melee. Ranged enemies will also have ranged attack values, which show how accurate their attacks are and how much damage they'll do. Some enemies also will have secondary effects. Here you can see that both of the Lizard Enchanter's attacks deal 1 damage and also set the hero on fire. When heroes or ranged enemies fight, you'll again roll 3 dice and check the appropriate chart to see the result. These can include trading blows where both the hero and the foe alike take damage, staggering a foe so that the next attack against them gains a bonus to its roll, critical hits, which will not only strike true but also give a similar advantage to the next attacker, misses, or if you're especially clumsy with a bow, a character may even shoot an ally by accident. Of course, in true RPG fashion, fighting monsters is only one small part of the trials that adventurers will have to surpass. Obstacles, barriers, and discoveries alike will have the heroes testing various skills in an attempt to overcome them. They come in 3 varieties, though all work in a similar way. Most of the time you'll roll 3 dice for a test, though many tests have a specialty icon, and if a hero has the matching icon, either from their character card itself or from a skill they possess, they'll roll 4 dice and ignore the lowest result. Basic tests are the simplest. Choose one hero and choose which of 3 actions they'll take. If they succeed, they'll get the green result, and if they fail, they take the red. Next, you have table tests. With these, after rolling, you take the highest number that you've passed, with differing degrees of success depending on how well you do. Basic and table tests both also have party variants, where each individual party member must test rather than just one. In these cases, a particularly successful roll can aid the party and allow another hero to succeed automatically. Finally, you have stage tests, which introduce a push your luck mechanic into the game. After succeeding at the lowest level, you can choose to roll again in hopes of succeeding at the next one. But if you fail your roll, you'll drop down. If you ever fail the lowest level, you'll find yourself receiving some sort of nasty penalty. The adventure deck also contains a number of trap cards. No, that joke is too easy. If your party is alert or bold as determined by their scouting check, they'll evade such problems. If they're careless, however, they'll walk right into it, taking various penalties accordingly. As players progress through the game, they'll spend time in various ways, sometimes willingly to gain certain advantages, other times as a result of a failed test. This is done by discarding cards from the event deck to represent the passage of time. Most of the time you'll do this face down, but once you reach the bottom of the deck, you reveal the last one and follow the instructions on the card. The rest of the deck is then reshuffled and play continues as normal. This means events will happen more and more rapidly as the game goes on. When the event deck no longer has any more cards remaining, players don't automatically lose, but at this point they may no longer willingly spend time. Whenever they would be forced to do so, they must exhaust a talent or flip one if there are none available to exhaust. Wait a minute! You use a deck of event cards to keep track of the passage of time, and they go face down until you resolve them. When I describe the game in this ultra-specific and selectively deceptive manner, it sounds like a ripoff of StarCraft the board game. In addition to the standard rules, there's a number of variants included in the rulebook. These include ways to make the game easier and harder, a method for playing the game as a more traditional RPG with a GM, as well as rules for playing solo. I'm well aware that many players dislike when a game forces you to do the bookkeeping for multiple players in order to play solo, and while I've personally never had qualms with such myself, the game also includes rules for playing with a single lone hero, giving them 2 extra talents at first level to compensate for the lack of allies. Component-wise, the game is solid. Cards are of decent thickness and have really well detailed art. Honestly, I'm surprised that a first-time dev was able to afford art that's this good. The game also includes 2 sheets of cardboard tokens and 4 standard D6s. There's not much to say about these, they're just what you'd expect. The game also includes an insert which is workable but not great. But let's be honest here, most games don't even attempt to have a proper insert, so workable is still a step above average. Legends Untold feels like the game that the Pathfinder adventure card game failed to be. Whereas that title felt thematically disconnected and scenarios felt dull and repetitive, Legends Untold focuses more on the RPG elements, stringing together a narratively coherent locale with events tailored to said location. While this also means that an individual set has less variety in the events that will happen within it, it overcomes this by making the scenarios more diverse and making them feel like a more logically structured adventure. While these 2 titles play wildly differently, if you were disappointed in how Pathfinder Adventure card game handled its RPG roots, I highly recommend you take a look at Legends Untold. Price of entry is also lower than PACG, and while you don't get as many cards in Legends Untold, I would definitely argue that it does more with less. All in all, Legends Untold is a solid title that achieves its goal of trying to feel like an RPG in a box. There's a lot of character options right out of the box, which only increases if you decide to get both novice sets and combine them. Progression keeps things interesting, and while the narrative for the campaign is rather brief, it does give enough for players to string the adventure together. It's a very versatile game with all the options that it gives for players to increase or decrease the difficulty to their liking, and with 16 scenarios in the box, you'll get a lot more mileage out of it than I would expect from a game in this price range. On the downside, there is a lot of dice chucking, and it's not rare that such is what will ultimately decide your success or failure. I had one game where the dice were exceptionally favorable to me, and I ended up defeating a boss character that I was supposed to be running away from. Another time, the RNG was so bad that I died in the first room. Though both of these are extreme examples, and I wouldn't expect to see either of them repeated often. Then there's the double-edged sword of having everything tied to the setting. This means that there's a strong theme that ties the enemies and trials together, but it also limits the amount of variety that you're going to see out of a single box. Regardless, Legends Untold manages to achieve its aim. For fans of RPGs that can't find anyone that wants to GM, or even those that have to go it alone, I highly recommend you consider this title and find it worthy of an 8.2 out of 10. If you're interested in purchasing Legends Untold or learning more, links are included in the description. But what about you? How do you feel about Legends Untold? What game do you feel best captures the feeling of an RPG in a box? If you have any questions, remarks, or opposing points of view, leave them in the comments down below, and please remember to like, share, subscribe, and ring that bell. Until next time, farewell, fellow fanatics. Thank you again for watching. I have plenty more to share with you if you're interested. You can click up here above my head to subscribe to my channel. You can click over here on my monitor to see the most recent video that I've worked on. Or if you prefer, you can click up here to open this mysterious vault and see what video that the YouTube algorithm has picked just for you.